Two. Hey, welcome back to the Group Project Podcast. This is episode number 114. And today I'm with Jerry Gallagher. Jerry, hey, good morning, man. How are you doing?
Hey, great. 114 is my favorite number. How coincidental.
What is the chances on that one? I've never heard of 114, but dude, it's nice to have you here. We have worked together for the last 3 or 4 years, but in a very unique capacity. And I'm excited for Jerry to kind of share what he and his company do there. And we talked a little bit before the show, like, guys, I'm just letting you know, listeners, like, mark this day when you've heard about Jerry and his group here, because they're getting pretty big and they're going to be, kind of known out throughout the United States and maybe further for their communications here. So, Jerry, I don't want to share any of your or steal any of your thunder here, but dude, what is it that you do? And you've got a crazy, unique background as well. So just share like your experiences and share what you do currently in your position.
Sure. Well, first of all, Jared, thank you very much for having me on the podcast, and I've listened in the last year or two, and you do such a wonderful job. And also congratulations on your new role as well. We're very excited to see you move into the Cedar Valley. I am a partner with the Donovan Group, which is a communications firm that works exclusively with public education. And this is a firm that started in Milwaukee more than a decade ago. And at that time, what the focus was to support schools with crisis communications and referendum or bond issues. And so a school district in Wisconsin was going to vote. They needed some communication support to be able to inform the community. Here are the needs that the district has. Here's the potential solution on the ballot. Get that information disseminated. And so that's what the Donovan Group did for a number of years and still does. I mean, I would say that really is the foundation of the company even today, is crisis communication support and that bond referendum initiative as well. But when I left television, and I'll talk a little bit here about my background in a minute, but when I left television a few years ago, I was looking to be able to do something with communications and with schools with a better schedule than what television presents.
Yes.
And I've got 4 kids, and I wanted to be able to go to their events and do those kinds of things. But I found the Donovan Group in Milwaukee, and I'm from Cedar Falls. That's where I live right now. But I found the Donovan Group in Milwaukee and talked to the president of the company, Joe Donovan, about possibly opening an office in Iowa and supporting schools in Iowa with more of a broader vision. What I found in television was that there were a number of smaller to mid-sized school districts that did not have an internal communications department. And I think that we've now found this across the country, but these schools still have the same needs that larger, metro urban school districts have, that have their own communications team. And so how can we find a way to make this work for them financially, for them and for us, and also to support them on a daily basis with their communications needs? And we've been able to do that, I think, in a very successful manner in the last 3 or 4 years.
Okay. So you briefly talked about your television experience. Can we talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Because that's how I grew up. Well, let's see. You were there from 14. Okay. Not grew up, but like, I remember seeing you on TV as the morning news anchor for the primary, the only news station in town up there. So maybe tell us about that. Just tell anything you want to share about your biggest takeaways, I guess, from your television experience, because that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a wild ride. I mean, I really, really loved it. I grew up in Strawberry Point and Storm Lake. I lived in those 2 communities in the state of Iowa. And when I was growing up, I always wanted to be a first baseman for the Chicago Cubs. It did not take me long to figure out I didn't quite have the stature or the athletic ability to make that dream come true. So I had to find something else to do. And so I had a dream of being a journalist. I come from a family of writers. I'm the youngest of 8 kids. And at one time, 4 boys in our family all worked for the same newspaper in Storm Lake Times. So we always had writing in our background. Well, it happened to be on July 19th, 1989, that I was heading from Storm Lake to Sioux City. And I think this was the first time that I was ever in Sioux City. And I was going with my parents to go watch my brother play baseball, a baseball tournament in Sioux City. And as we were driving on Highway 20 west, we kept getting passed by all of these ambulances that were screaming by us headed towards Sioux City. And keep in mind, at that time, you didn't have cell phones, you didn't have the internet, so you really had no way to know what exactly was going on.
Yeah.
And as we pulled into Sioux City, we saw this huge plume of smoke emanating near the airport. And it was a short time later that we learned that Flight 232 had crashed and done this somersault, all been caught on camera. I think it was the first time that something like this had ever been caught on camera. And incredibly, more than 100 people survived this plane crash when it burst into flames. It was just unbelievable to watch. Well, what had happened, or what transpired, is we went to the baseball game. It still went on that day, even though this unbelievable emergency was happening at that time that it was captivating the entire country. But when we got home that night to Storm Lake, and I turned on the TV and I saw the national news covering wall to wall what had happened, this disaster, but also at the same time, in a way, a miracle in Sioux City that day, I knew at that point that I had to be in television as a broadcast journalist. I was just so amazed by how quickly TV could mobilize and get to a location and show things as they were happening, that I knew that that was what I wanted to do. And so I went to UNI, graduated in broadcast journalism from UNI, got my first job in Sioux City, spent a few years there. I was on the air the day that 9/11 happened, and I'll never forget broadcasting that live for 8 or 9 hours. And then spent 12 years in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where all 4 of my children were born. And so Eau Claire, Wisconsin is a big piece of my heart as well. But it came to be, Jared, that those hours are really brutal. When we moved back to Cedar Falls, where I'd gone to school at UNI, and I went to work at KWWL in Waterloo, I was getting up at 1 o'clock in the morning to anchor the morning show. And while I really enjoyed the job, I was a walking zombie with those hours, and it just became really unworkable. So I did that for 3 or 4 years, and I really enjoyed that time at KWWL because I had the opportunity to work with one of my mentors, Ron Steele, who was one of the reasons I got into the business. But
wow,
it became untenable. So that's why I made the transition to the job that I now hold with the Donovan Group. But you asked about the takeaways. I had the chance to do a lot of great interviews over the years, met so many great people, and I interviewed candidates who would become president. I interviewed Captain Kangaroo. That was always one of those.
Oh, wow. That's a good one.
That was always one of those that struck me, because that was somebody who I watched when I was a kid. But to me, there was no story more impactful than what we did as a public service when there was some kind of public threat. To be able to go on the air immediately. And I remember a toddler who disappeared in Wisconsin, a 4-year-old who wandered away from his home on July 3rd of 2012. And we went on the air immediately with his picture and information to mobilize the community. And hundreds of people showed up in a small town outside of Eau Claire to look for this boy. And he had autism, and he has autism, and he was nonverbal, and so he could not scream for help, which made the search for him even that much more difficult.
Wow.
Well, I'm sure you followed cases like this over the years. Of course, we remember Lyric and Elizabeth, that the longer that you go that they aren't found, the more grim the outlook is. And we went 22 hours without any word of him. And it just so happened that a teacher who was on his summer break got up the next morning on July 4th, saw the news, grabbed his dog, and went searching an hour away from where he lived for the boy. And he found the boy huddled against a tree, covered in mosquito bites, dehydrated, but alive,
Wow.
overlooking the Mississippi River on a bluff 22 hours after that boy disappeared. And I'll never forget how I felt when I went on the air that day. And I'm, getting goosebumps right now
Yeah.
just talking about this, that, short of a nuclear attack, I don't think there's anything more important than broadcasting the information when a child goes missing or is in danger. And to be able to say that that child was found alive and is safe
Yeah.
was such a great experience. And a month later, he was thrown out the first pitch in a Minnesota Twins game.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, that's a lot to throw at you, but that gives you a little bit of
Yeah.
background about me and then the transition that I made
That's
into the
cool.
Donovan Group. It was,
Yeah.
I've really been fortunate. I've really been lucky to have two careers that have benefited me in a great way.
So good segue, because my next question was going to be about the Donovan Group. You talked about it a little bit. You talked about the services a little bit that you offer. One question I had was, are there other companies out there like you guys? And maybe go back if you want to give me more context to what you guys do, that'd be great. But are these types of companies becoming more and more common, or what do you see? What does the communication landscape look like for schools? Maybe give us your perspective.
Yeah, I think that we found out a couple of years ago, in particular with COVID, that the need to communicate on a daily basis, there became a higher premium on that. That you had to find, and you have to find different channels to be able to communicate to your state. This isn't just about communicating to parents. In so many communities across the country, Jared, the school is the primary employer. The school is the really is the foremost community icon. And so you've got to be able to connect to everybody else in the community when a crisis like COVID hits. How are you going to function on a day-to-day basis, and so on and so forth. And so I think we learned that there was just a great need to be able to find different ways to get your message across, whether it's in a crisis like that or even, day-to-day run of the mill. I think one of the things that we've learned here in the last year or so is that there's a lot of misinformation about schools out there. And it's incumbent upon schools to be able to get the message about what it is that they are teaching in the classroom. What are kids learning? What are some of the great achievements that happen every single day? And in our conversations with schools, one of the things that we learned was that there were many smaller to mid-sized schools, and even some larger schools, that were only really communicating to their greater community. And I'm not talking about just parents here, to their greater community when there was a crisis. And so our suggestion to them was to be able to find ways to what we call it chasing the good news. Be intentional about sharing the great things that are happening in your classroom on a day-to-day basis. Do not let the good gather dust on a shelf, because so often what schools will do, and I think this is the case with a lot of businesses, is that something good happens. Well, that's not the most important thing of the day. We'll get to it in a couple of days. We'll make sure and share that with our customers, with our stakeholders. But then something else comes up the next day and you just forget about it, and then it becomes less timely. And we feel like good news should be treated to me, it's urgent. Get it out there, let people know that it happened, and don't let somebody else own your story. And so we just found that there wasn't a lot of infrastructure to be able to do that at schools in Iowa and across the country. And so I think that's how we're helping to fill that gap.
What, if somebody's listening right now, and maybe you talked about like the smaller districts, the mid-sized districts who probably don't have a communications director, probably don't have a communications team, obviously. But talking about like outsourcing their communications, to some people that's a little scary. They don't know what they're getting into. Like, I guess, what would you say, what are the advantages? And maybe even if you're comfortable, maybe talk about, so people know, like, what is the typical cost of your services, or what are the packages that you offer? I want to make sure people who are listening understand like what your company can do for them.
Yeah, let me explain. I guess the first part of this is about the litany of services that we do provide that range from that crisis communications, the bond referendum support that I talked about, to day-to-day communication. This is social media management. So this isn't just we're creating social media for you, but we're also in some ways we can manage those pages for you. We
Mm.
do all kinds of writing, so parent letters, news releases, sharing some of those great stories that are happening. We will write those for you and share that content with the local media. Because in many communities, the newspaper is still a great form to be able to reach everybody
Mhm.
in your community. So we do a tremendous amount of writing. We do all kinds of graphic design and video work. We do branding videos. We do day-to-day videos. One of the ways in which we've really encouraged schools to use current or trendy communication tools to be able to get out to stakeholders is through your iPhone. Is for a teacher to be able to stand in front of their classroom and for 30 or 45 seconds just say, this is in a Miss Johnson's room, or this is a Mr. Smith's room, and here's what we accomplished today. In
Mhm.
30 to 45 seconds, I can pretty much tell you, we've got kids working in the background and maybe they're smiling and waving. They would send that video to us, and we would put music and graphics and do other kinds of things to put a professional polish on it, and then post that on a daily basis. And so 30 to 45 seconds, which we find really, and I think you know this, Jared, that's the sweet spot
Mm.
for video communications. It's similar to like a commercial or an advertisement. And there's a reason why businesses and television networks continue to employ 30 to 60-second commercials, is because that's what really works. And so
Mhm.
we create these smaller videos. That's just another thing that we do within that kind of um, almost kind of a smorgasbord of a lineup that we would provide to schools. And schools can tell us what they want. And so we can come in initially with a school and say, because they may not know, they've never having worked with this outsourcing, like, as you say, it is, they don't know, like, how do we get started? Well, we get started by doing a communications audit. And so
Mm.
we would look at the school district, maybe a 30,000 foot perspective, to be able to review what is it they do well, and maybe what are the challenges or opportunities that they have that we could help support them with. And then we provide them with a communications plan to be able to set benchmarks month by month over the next year, let's say, to be able to say, here are the ways in which we can take what you have and improve upon it, and maybe fill in the gaps with some of those challenges and opportunities, and communicate widely. But I can tell you, graphic design has become a big part of what we do. Being able to do mailers,
Mhm.
annual reports, posters for the classrooms, social media content through graphic design. And so finding ways to be appealing, visually appealing, to get your message across, and doing so in basically a one-page document.
Mhm.
Because as you know, people don't read necessarily, they're not going to read,
Yeah.
a book of information
Yep.
or a multi-page document.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of the beast. And so we try to find ways to simplify and make things visually.
So you identify, so if somebody's interested, just reach out to you and they can kind of like tell you their situation and you'll kind of know which direction to go with them. And it sounds like the communications audit is kind of the first thing, kind of the first step. Is that?
Yeah, I think that that's our foot in the door to be able to understand what what they need.
Mhm.
There are some schools who will contact us that know right away. This is we and this is where our price points vary. Is that a school might call and just say, we have one project. That's all we
Yeah.
want you to do for us. Here is a branding video. Here is a brochure. That's it. But then there are those who call and say, you know what, we know that we have some needs. We have a
Yeah.
strategic plan that we want to really delve into with our communication, but we don't really know where to go from there. And so can you walk us through what those next steps would be?
If somebody said to you, well, why does communication matter? Like, some people are so focused on assessment scores or other metrics within the building. What's your response in terms of why communication matters?
It's the tie that binds everybody together. I mean, we are talking about, and I feel like, again, that there may not be anything more important than a school and a community. Obviously, for some, it's your religious institutions, healthcare, food. All of these things are a part of it. But to me, communication through the school is something that can tie us all together, because we were all in school. Most of us were in school at some point in time, and so we
Mhm.
know what that's like. And so even if you are in your 90s, you remember what that is, and that education was important to you. And so you may have an interest in how that school that you went to, or years and years ago, continues to be successful to this day. And so I feel like communicating what the successes are of the school, what they are doing on a day-to-day basis, is important to tie the entire community together.
Well, I had a question down about social media. People have, everybody's got their opinions on, is social media good or bad, indifferent? What do you share your thoughts on the role of social media in terms of the success of the school, or just any other thoughts you have on social media and education that merge?
I wouldn't run from it. I would embrace social media. And the reason that I would is that for now, and this could change, for now, it continues to be a primary source of two-way instant communication between your community and the school. And so I think it's very important to have an active, robust social media presence, as you have done perhaps better than anybody else that I've seen in the state of Iowa. Because what it does is it not only informs, but it generates, I think, goodwill. It pulls back the curtain. It tells your community that, look, we're transparent, and we're going to tell you what's going on, and we're going to invite you to be able to communicate with us through this platform. So I think that social media allows you to do so many different things. The one thing that I would really encourage schools to do, though, is to communicate through social media about all things. Find ways to balance. One of the things that I often talk to schools about is, does your Saturday afternoon speech contest receive as many tweets as the Friday night football game? And, by and large, the answer is no. And I don't want anybody to get defensive here. Most of us love high school football.
Yep.
It's a great place to be at, and a venue to be at on a Friday night. The reason it gets as much attention as it does is because there are so many eyeballs on it. And I understand that. That's just the nature of it. However, what I think that schools can do is find ways to build infrastructure to be able to provide a little bit better balance, to say, we want those kids who are in speech on a Saturday afternoon, even though it's a weekend, to be able to get attention for their accomplishments. And so find ways to build in that infrastructure through social media to get that message out when it happens.
So you did a great job of kind of, in terms of, like, you've given a couple tips for schools. And the one question I had written down was, any other tips you have for school leaders about effective communication, or are there any common communication mistakes that you see out there that you want to advise us to stay away from?
Yeah, I think a common mistake is to send blanket updates or communication on Friday afternoon. I often see this where a school will send like a robocall, or the teacher will send a recap on Friday afternoon. And I just can tell you that the listen rate and open rate on those, through research, indicates that it's not happening. And the reason is that our tank is empty by Friday.
Yeah.
It just is. We need the weekend to recharge the battery. And one of those, one of the outliers, or one of the things that we've seen from that, is that it's not an outlier, but one of the things we've seen from that is that people just tend to not respond to business or school related communication near as much on Friday. One of the reasons why, for years and years in journalism, we would call it the Friday news dump, because we knew that corporations, businesses, would send out bad news on Fridays, typically because they knew that it would kind of vanish into ether, because people were not paying attention near as much. And so we really recommend, if you want to communicate with stakeholders, a great time to do it, and it is an overlooked time, is Sunday night between the hours of like 6 and 9 p.m. And the reason that is that people are recharged. They have filled the backpacks for Monday at that point in time. They've generally made their plans for the week. or started to at least. And they will have, at that point, at some point, sit down with their laptop or their phone and the TV on in the background to be able to, okay, I'm at this point, I can now be able to absorb. And they
Mhm.
were not able to absorb up until that point. I mean, there's a reason, Jared, that Sunday Night Football continues to be the highest rated television program year after year. And that's because that's when most Americans are still finding time to be able to sit down on the couch and absorb communication.
Good point.
So we think that that's a great time to maybe send out a weekly recap, what's going on for the week ahead. Survey, what a great form of communication. We
Mhm.
still find that surveys work.
Mhm.
And so sending things out, even if it's a 2 or 3 question, give us feedback on this. We find that surveying your entire community about how they like to have communication come to them is another great way. But
Yeah.
figuring out ways to do that on a Sunday night or a Monday morning,
Okay.
we think are optimal.
Okay. It's another good tip there. I appreciate that. One last question before we kind of just jump into some quick hitters here, but give us the Jerry Gallagher crystal ball. How do you see communication changing in the future? You mentioned some of those trends. You seem like you know a lot of research, you can feel the trends. And I know it's very difficult, but what are some changes you see potentially in the future here?
I think one change, Jared, that I see is that we will witness more of our youth taking hold of communication in a very positive way.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is already we have schools that have given student groups the keys to the car, so to speak, for like a school district Instagram account or a Snapchat account.
Mhm.
And there has been some pushback from schools about, liability issues, or why would
Yeah.
can we really trust kids to do this? And my response to that is, well, when I was a kid, we were on the yearbook staff. And so we were in charge of that. And so to me,
Sure.
I don't know that there's much difference if you can find a trusted group. And I just really think that opening the door for students to be able to help tell your story in a positive way, I
Mhm.
think that the reward truly outweighs the risk
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And finding ways to be able to manage that appropriately. I think that is a next wave that we see. We're going to see
Mhm.
kids, because kids love, I know, there might be some who would roll their eyes, but kids do love their school experience. They just love it for different reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
They find ways to be able to enjoy coming back. And so tapping into that and allowing them to have ownership of their learning. I mean, you live
Mhm.
in this world, and how important it is for kids to have ownership of their learning. Well, why can't we allow them to have ownership of their communication about their learning,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
providing that as a platform for them to share the
Yeah.
things that are happening?
So I was with my two nieces for the last week and they were constantly on TikTok, Snapchat, and YouTube. Those are three kind of maybe YouTube a little bit, but like Snapchat and TikTok are like two untapped areas that here in our district. Do you have any thoughts or feelings on how schools could leverage those, or have you not quite figured that out yet either? Or what are your thoughts on those kind of like more of the short video ideas? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Snapchat, I think, is a little different just because of the nature of it and how the image, disappears, right? But
Mm-hmm.
TikTok, there are schools that are really taking advantage of the video audience that you have there. And so I've seen teachers that will create fun, engaging 30-second videos that are about maybe explaining something as simple as tomorrow is school spirit day, wear this, to something that is even broader and maybe a little more complex about PBIS. Okay, we're going to demonstrate a positive behavior in the hallway and turn that into a TikTok video.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's you're talking to your most important stakeholder group, which are the kids, in their element, which is on the platforms. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I just think finding ways to embrace that and create these tools within your own school district and infrastructure, I think is important.
I got one other question for you that was not on the list here, and it's kind of a touchy question, but I'm curious. There's a lot of perception. I see a lot of different views out there on, posting pictures of students, what's acceptable, what's not, what's etiquette, what's not, what's legal, what's not. What do you advise? What do you advise school districts in terms of when you got these pictures of a large group of kids, and do you have to have some sort of consent form? Is it okay not to? And again, I know it's kind of a tricky question, but I don't know if I really know the rule. We kind of just go ahead and do it, and we haven't had any issues. But what do you know from your experiences?
So from my experience, the schools that we work with have some kind of a waiver that is signed at the beginning of the school year, which can be like an opt-out policy.
Yeah.
Opt-out waiver. And so if they don't want their photos of their students used in any kind of marketing purposes, which we would say social media, I mean, it's a marketing communication form, that they need to, sign that form or sign that waiver. And so it's pretty clear to us that when we're utilizing images, that who can and cannot be used on that, used to that resource. But I think I know where you're going with this, that how much is too much, maybe too, as well, or not? I mean, is that what you're thinking, or is it just about?
Sometimes we have the same opt-out thing, but then as the year goes on, like sometimes we don't check every single.
Okay.
We aren't like, 100%. We take a little bit of risk. We take a little bit of like, let's just put it out there. We haven't had any issues. But I never know the exact, you know what I'm saying? Like, shoot, we had an assembly at the end of last day of school with our elementary, large, massive, like group photos. We didn't, as a communications team, we did not go through and like look and see who's got those sheets turned in, who turned in a sheet not to be part of that. So we kind of just, and maybe I shouldn't publicly be saying that, but like we just put the pictures up and don't worry about it. Is that a right approach, or should we be a little bit more careful about it? And I'm talking like a huge group photo of 200 kids out watching at an assembly outside. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I guess my experience with photos and publishing those, which we do every single day, is almost exclusive to those that you can really identify the student in.
Yeah.
So if it's the back of a head, to me, that does not apply.
Yep.
If it is a drone photo of 200 students from above that you cannot individually identify faces, then I don't think that applies. And so I do think that there is a little bit of a grace on that, and also just you see it when you see it. It's like, okay, I think we need to check on this because there are 3 students in this photo that are easily identifiable.
Sure. Okay. Yep. That's kind of the guidance I've been given too. I just was curious if you heard anything differently, because it's becoming more and more prevalent about putting kids' pictures up. I mean, it's encouraged, you want to share the good things going on. And so it gets a little tricky at times, but I've never personally ran into any issues. And we've been doing this at a high level for 8 years, at least in my 2 previous districts. So
yeah, you have a high volume that goes out. So you're a pretty good test subject.
We're pretty high volume. Probably like the one downfall at times, like when is too much. You mentioned that earlier. So, but hey, okay, let's shift. Is there anything else you want to share about Donovan Group, school communication, anything in general there?
Oh, I think it's an evolving type of business. We don't know that there are too many other companies across the country that are doing this on a daily basis to serve schools, only public schools. And so if anybody has any questions, they can find us on the internet and track us down.
That's my question. You mentioned, you've mentioned Wisconsin, Iowa, but before the show, you mentioned, I mean, this is really, you've got schools or districts in a number of different states. So if they're outside the Midwest, absolutely, that's somebody, a client of yours, could potentially be a client of yours.
Sure. Yeah. We're in Florida, we're in Pennsylvania, we're in Delaware, we're in California, we're in Arizona. So we're all over now. And one of the ways that we are finding ourselves into new states is that we are working with partnership organizations to establish a 24-hour crisis hotline for schools to be able to call us to provide guidance when a crisis happens. And so, for instance, beginning July 1st, we will support schools in Arizona. We're already supporting schools in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Delaware and elsewhere with that service. And so we found that to be very valuable to schools in a pinch. And it certainly was something during COVID that they utilized quite frequently.
Cool. Cool. Hey, if you're just joining us, this is episode number 114, Jerry's favorite number, apparently. Jerry Gallagher, who is partner of the Donovan Group. Prior to being with the Donovan Group, he was on the morning news. He was on the news in a few different areas there. So very cool background, very cool story. And by the way, you were linked up with me through one of our sponsors, who's Trent Grenmeyer, with Grunmeyer Leader Services. So is my understanding you're teaming up with GLS to do some communications. Is that correct?
We are a partner with GLS to be able to provide written and visual video communication when a new hire enters the district. So for instance, if a superintendent is hired, what we do is, which I know happened in South Tama, I know it also happened in Waterloo recently,
Yep.
that we would draft a news release, other communications, and create a video to be able to introduce that superintendent into the community. Because again, we find that video is something that crosses all different age brackets, from the young to those who are not so young. Everybody seems to love and watch video. That's great.
Yes. I mean, you've talked about like at least 25 different things that you guys, all things communication. Right. It just sounds like reach out to Jerry at Donovan Group, and they can kind of talk you through some options there. Okay, Jerry, let's switch gears. We got about 10 minutes left. Okay. I've got like 6 or 7. You've listened to the show before, kind of quick hitters. Just really curious to learn about some of your thoughts here. So, okay, man, I just moved up to where you're living right now. So I'm curious if listeners visit Waterloo, Cedar Falls, the Cedar Valley area, what's one place they've got to check out?
So the bike trails are such a big part of the fabric of the Cedar Valley. And I'm not even one that bikes a lot, but I just love to be able to see that when I'm out and about with my kids. That it always feels as if there's activity going on, because the bike trails connect to so many different great spaces, businesses, green spaces, communities. And so I think that that's such a terrific piece of the area up here. Cedar Falls Main Street's terrific. Waterloo downtown has just absolutely reinvented itself in the last decade. Irish Fest is one of my favorite events every single August. And if you haven't had a chance to check out the Singlespeed location in Waterloo and what they did to the old Wonder Bread factory, I think that is a must see.
So you mentioned Singlespeed, which has got some food there. I always ask, do you have one like go-to restaurant?
Yeah, I like the Brown Bottle in Waterloo. Yeah. The ambiance there, like sitting in the library and having a good meal. So that probably is one of my go-tos. But
what's your favorite menu item?
Oh, geez. Anything pasta. I mean, you name it, and the Brown Bottle does it really, really well. And so I don't think you can go wrong with anything on their menu.
And if you love garlic bread, they've got a real distinct garlic bread that I always eat like 5 or 6 pieces before the meal even gets to you. So yeah, I agree. Good stuff. Hey, Jerry, what is one book that has greatly influenced your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it was a book written by my brother.
Whoa.
So my brother, who is the owner of a business along with my sister and her ex-husband here in Cedar Falls, Talk to Me Technologies is the name of the business. He has written 2 books. One of those was about Kenny Arnold, who played basketball for the Iowa Hawkeyes and was on the Final Four team. And that book is called Teammates for Life. But the most recent book that he wrote was about my mother, who passed away. It would be 13 years ago now. And that book is called The Teacher. And this book chronicles the last several days of her life. And that even as she was dying from cancer, that she was still imparting wisdom and lessons and showing us through strength and grace how to really carry yourself. And through love, even in your final moments, what that means. And she was my kindergarten teacher. It's part of why I have public education in my blood, is that I've always been surrounded by public educators. But she was my kindergarten teacher, and there just are so many great stories in there about her. But I think it applies to anybody that's been around a teacher, whether literal or figurative, which she was both. Just there are so many great lessons to be learned there, and it was really written well.
So I'm on Amazon and I'm looking at it, right? Is your brother Marty?
Yes.
So this just came out like a year ago.
Yeah, not too long ago, but
Wow.
um, I think that when anybody loses a parent, and in fact, I just lost my dad a month ago. He was 97 years old, lived a fantastic life. But I think when anybody loses a parent, you go through that grief stage, and then acceptance stage, and just looking back at your life and putting a bow on it. And that book for me was the bow. Being able to read that and say, wow, that in such an amazing way encapsulated who she was as a person and a mother and a teacher, and everything that she bestowed on all 8 of her kids and the community and every student that she taught. It just was really well done.
So the book is called The Teacher, Mom's Powerful Lessons in Her Final Days by Marty Gallagher. So it's on Amazon, guys. There's a hardcover edition. It's actually like on sale right now too. So go check that out. That sounds like a really, really cool book. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
Next question is, okay, if you could attend one musical concert, what would it be?
Well, I can't attend the Beatles. Would have loved to. I would say AC/DC. I've never seen them perform, and their producer who produced a lot of their great stuff in the early 80s, Mutt Lange, also produced for Def Leppard and Shania Twain, who are also 2 of my favorites, who I have seen both of them perform, but I've never seen AC/DC in it. So I think that I would love to be able to catch them if they begin to tour again.
Okay, that was my question. I know I'm pretty naive when it comes to like some of the classic rock, if you want to say that. Do they have? When was the last time they were on tour?
I think that they had scheduled something pre-COVID,
Okay.
and so I don't know that they're back up and run and touring again, but I think that they will again before they shut it down. They'll be out there at least one more time, so I think I'll get a chance.
That's so cool. So cool. Okay, if you're going to a convenience store, and I'm curious, are you a Casey's guy, Quick Star guy? Do you have like a go-to convenience store up there in your area?
Yeah, I'm a Casey's guy. I would say I'm not a coffee drinker. I've never had a cup of coffee in my life, but I do like their cappuccino.
Wow.
So I do like the Casey's cappuccino. I'm a big fan. Who isn't a big fan of their pizza? But I also, I think a go-to is Chex Mix. Just that salty snack. I think
Yeah.
that can kind of carry you through the day if you're on the road or you're unable to really have a good sit-down meal.
Okay, so those are the 3 items then. The cappuccino, the pizza, what flavor, what toppings pizza?
Oh, I think pepperoni, but their breakfast pizza is it's unparalleled. And so if I've got an early morning drive to a school, I'm stopping to get a cappuccino and some breakfast pizza to give me the fuel for that drive.
So let's even dig deeper then. Breakfast pizza, are you going is it sausage or the bacon? Which way do you go?
Yeah, sausage or the bacon. And I've been dating a woman for a year and a half who is in international marketing for Hormel. So I'm going to go for the bacon. Okay. I think every time.
Some people will complain the bacon's too much. Some people, you're good with it though. I mean, there's a lot of bacon on those. You're good with it.
I am good. Love the bacon.
Okay. Okay. Can you recall? I mean, you've got a very fascinating job history. Can you recall a job you applied for but did not get?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I was in college and applied for an internship at an electric co-op. And I think what I learned from that process was there is just this whole thing about either fate, however you want to call it, about jobs in particular, whether they're meant to be or not. And so oftentimes it isn't necessarily that the interview went bad and it didn't go well. I'll just say that as much as it was just not the right fit for you. And so I think you know that. And so in the careers that I've had and the positions that I've had at various companies, I've always known really quickly, Jared, whether it was a good fit or not. And so I look back at not getting that job and just know that I'm lucky probably that I didn't, because it just wasn't the right fit for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. I talked with so many people on this show about their not getting jobs and how it all, not being the right fit, but everything happening for a reason. So
Right.
doesn't very cool. Hey, you seem like a pretty productive person. I mean, I've had many interactions with you. You're always on top of things. What's your best tip for being productive?
I think it's to make a list. And I know that that's an easy way to, I don't want that just to come across as cliche or lazy, but I live by my day-to-day lists every single day and making sure that I am charting what I'm doing to be able to reach, certain benchmarks throughout the course of the day. And working in communications is similar to being a superintendent in that you have to prepare for the unexpected throughout the course of the day. And so building in that capacity as well. But you just cannot go wrong with the list. To
So
this day, I mean, that's old fashioned, but you
tell
can't.
me a little bit more about your list. Two questions I have. Is it like handwritten list?
No, and so maybe this is quirky.
Yeah, no, let's hear it.
So I put it in my phone and set alarms on my phone for to reach the certain benchmarks. And so if I have to get so I think this is in the deadline world that I lived in journalism for a long time.
Yeah.
Is I will tell myself I have to get this done by 10 o'clock and I'll set an alarm in my phone for it.
Huh.
One of my partners, who is the best writer that I've ever been around, has a 15-minute alarm that he sets on his phone throughout the day, and that he does not want to spend more than 15 minutes on any given communication item. And so he's trained his brain to be able to move quickly and efficiently. And it's not to say that he's not given a big project that at some point it could go over 15, but he's in such a routine that 15 minutes, I'm moving on. 15 minutes,
Wow.
boom, 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 boom. And at the end of the
Wow.
day, you look back and you got a lot done.
I've talked to a lot of people about their habits and tips and tricks. I've never heard that before. The setting the alarm. It's pretty good stuff, man.
Yeah, might be a little nerdy, but
Oh, it's okay. Hey, whatever doing those 15-minute or whatever it is, yours wasn't the 15 minutes, but
no, mine isn't. I can't keep that.
Yeah.
I'm too much of a talker.
Yeah. That's still pretty good though. That's good stuff. Hey, Jerry, what is one big goal you are currently working on? Could be professional, could be personal. One big goal.
Yeah, I think that a big goal that I would have is to support my kids through their higher education as much as possible financially. I think that a lot of parents have that. And so their mom and I really work together hard on a plan to make sure that happens. And we don't know what that's going to look like. My youngest is 10 years old and my oldest is 18 and I have 4. So the 10-year-old, it might look entirely different by the time she gets to that point, but just to be able to have goals in mind, and not that I'm setting alarms in my phone for that,
Yeah.
but to be able to have, financial plan for them.
Okay, good. Is there any, as you're trying to like wrap your head around what that looks like, is there any expert out there you follow their framework? Any?
I rely a lot on those who are close in my inner circle and what they do. And so I think friends and loved ones and living through experience. And, I think that it's just important to be a sponge on these kinds of things, because I don't know that there's a perfect model for it. But at the same time, there are lots of things out there that have worked. And so just be open to good advice.
Okay. All right, Jerry. Hey, our time is pretty much up here. Is there anything we did not talk about that you would like the audience to know?
Well, anybody in education, just thank you for the work that you continue to do and support. And, one of the things that I feel about a teacher is that, and anybody in education, is that they save lives. They just don't necessarily always do it in real time. And so when we honor those in public service, as we should, oftentimes it's about protecting someone on the battlefield or running into a burning building. But I believe educators every single day are doing the same thing. It just isn't realized until years later. And I had an example of that, of a student, a former student who came up to my ex-wife years ago at an event. And this was 10 years after she had had him in class. And he had had struggles. And he came up to her and he said, if it wasn't for you, I don't know where I would be today. And that thank you to me, I think, happens every day. And they're quiet conversations often. But I just want to, send that point of gratitude to everyone in education for all that they do, because you are saving lives.
Awesome, man. Great way to finish the interview there. Hey, this is Jerry Gallagher, partner of the Donovan Group, the communications group. We mentioned a couple of times about contacting you. Should they just go to the website, just Google search Donovan Group, and then they'll figure out their way from there? Is that the best route?
I think that's the best way to go.
I started off a lot of my interviews with like my earlier ones about like getting real specific on email addresses and that sort of thing. I think it's just easier to just Google it.
Right.
You'll find it. You'll get your way there. But Jerry, thanks so much, man. I know we had to reschedule a couple of times. I appreciate you making time here. You got any big summer plans or anything coming up? It's June 23rd as we record this. So any big summer plans?
We just got back from San Diego. So we took the kids to San Diego, saw SeaWorld, sat in the third row, got splashed, went to a ball game, went to the USS Midway, just had a really great few days of relaxation. And so we're back at it now, but that was our big trip. And I do want to say it just real quick is that, and I know your listeners know this, but just to amplify it, is that Jared, you're such a great communicator, and you've taught me things about how you have built the system of communication tools and how consistent you are with that in South Tama. And I know in your next move to Waterloo, you'll do the exact same thing. And it's just been so impressive to watch you, because you are about wrapping your entire arms around the community and doing so in different methods. And it's just great to watch that.
Well, thank you very much. Man, you're making me feel good here too. I appreciate that. I think it's just so important that we tell I was kind of throwing some questions that I already have thought through myself about, like, what does it matter? What is it? But I got to think about those things, because I get those questions too sometimes about, like, what does communication really matter? Point me at the direct connection to student achievement. And that can be kind of tricky sometimes to make that leap, but you got to know it's the right thing, and you got to keep it going. I can feel it. We've passed projects here. We didn't even get into the project that you and I collaborated on, but it was our bond project, and passed with 83% approval, and that was a bunch, that was a group team effort. But you can't tell me that going into a brand new middle school, getting kids excited, getting the teachers excited, compared to the old middle school that we've got. What I'm saying is that communication that we used was a big piece of it, in terms of getting the project approved. And it wasn't just leading up to the bond; it was all the things we've been doing for 4 years about building trust with the community. So what I'm saying is, it might not be right away where you see where that communication pays off, but I feel like over the long course, it's going to have its impact on your student data. So
people always ask, or I shouldn't say always ask, but I get this question about what's the most important characteristic that a communicator has. And I felt this way as a journalist, and I feel this way today. It's to be a good listener. And I talk a lot. I know I do. I also think that I listen, and I try to what somebody is telling me, to be able to either communicate or adjust my communication. That is exactly what you're great at. And that's what we did in South Tama from round 1 to round 2, because we made mistakes, and that's okay. And you learn from it. But if you're a good listener and you hear from the public about what should work or what will work, and it did the second time around.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Well, hey, I appreciate it. We will continue to stay in touch here. I know, like I said, Jerry has more and more districts, or at least in this area, and I know throughout really the Midwest and beyond, have started to use Jerry and his group. So definitely check those guys out. It's well worth the investment. And when I say investment, I feel like they are a bargain. I don't know what their prices are for different packages, but what we got, it was an absolute bargain. So definitely check those guys out. So Jerry, I will let you get going there. Thanks again, man. We'll be in touch and keep up the great work. Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity, Jared. Have a great rest of the summer, everyone.